Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year once again. You're back with Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural, every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with our legal experts, Edward Pichardo, Esquire, and Royce Russell, Esquire. Today, is a day when, attorneys are always on the go. So we have one and we might be joined by the other depending on availability, but we are excited to have another conversation with you as we go through this year. Hey, Kevin, thank you for always being in the building with us. So, a lot has been happening as per usual in the world, and we hope that everyone is staying safe as we shared before. We have a whole lot of tragedy that continues to unfold, particularly around the pandemic. But not just that, there are other happenings in the news. And we recently lost two other ancestors. And, we take our moment to acknowledge when we have lost someone, particularly in our community. And hi, Dana. Great to see you. Thank you for joining in. So, Ed, I know this is definitely something that was very personal to you as well as we say rest in power to Miss Lonnie Goulier.
Yes, Lonnie Guinier. Definitely a Shiro, definitely a giant. Oh, by the way, hello everyone, hello audience. Welcome to Speaking Legally. Hola mi gente, buena tarde. Lonnie Guinier, she was a United States Supreme Court nominee during the Clinton administration, and that nomination got derailed because at that time the Republicans, who were at war with President Clinton and still stinging from the rejection of nominee Bork, decided to just go after Professor Guinier in terms of some of her opinions that are now commonplace when it comes to, guess what, voting rights. Voting
Wow.
rights. The stuff that people are talking about now as commonplace at that time, was considered controversial. They were calling Professor Guinier the quota queen and so forth, and claiming that she wasn't respectful of the power of the majority. Because her opinion was that just because, say, you have 51% of the vote doesn't mean that you should subject the other 49% to tyranny. That there should be some leveling of the playing field here, when it comes to voting rights and access to the vote, and people being allowed not just to exercise their vote but be able to have a right to certain privileges and so forth in a democracy, and the expansion of our democracy. So she was a real intellectual giant. I would welcome the audience to look at some of her articles and some of her writings. She dies at 71. I wish she really would have been able to make it on to the U.S. Supreme Court. She would have been a real benefit, to those who she served throughout her life. So definitely rest in power, Professor Guinier. You will be missed, and we certainly recognize you on this show, Speaking Legally, because you definitely spoke to the aims, the missions, and the goals of this show and what we project to our audience. Raymond, listen, I kind of agree. You have a lot of our folks who credited Clinton in some ways. I sometimes hear our folks saying, "Oh, that was the first black president." And I'm like, first black? What are you talking about? Did you examine the actual record? Yes, he did some things that were good, but you have to examine the whole record and before you make such a bold statement. So yeah, because I think what he's referring to is that President Clinton basically withdrew the nomination. People were very critical of President Clinton for that because they also felt like Professor Grenier was not allowed or advised not to respond to her critics at the time that all of these accusations were being criticisms were being leveled at her. It was kind of like, just stay quiet and stay the course, and we'll you'll get through this. But then it got withdrawn because I guess it became too quote unquote controversial. And now when you look back, look, we're in 2022 talking about voting rights, and we're seeing voter suppression legislation permeating the entire landscape. So interesting. And I'll leave it at that.
To say the least. And to your point, Biden has made a stand, and it hit the news on how he's talking about this is serious. And we'll probably spend a little bit more time on the show talking about this and what's happening in the states to make it harder. She was a pioneer. She was ahead of her time. This is what she was warning and talking about. And now here we are, to your point, 2022, still in a situation where we have to protect voting rights. So rest in
Absolutely.
power to Professor Lonnie Gagnier. Now, we also, unfortunately, lost another ancestor. And Raymond had another comment. Republicans stood up for Clarence.
They
Well,
sure did.
Raymond, that's a whole nother conversation, but it's the truth anyhow. And we appreciate your commentary there. And as we always take this time to acknowledge the greats as they have transitioned, we lost another great, uh, just a class act, Oscar-winning, groundbreaking star, actor Sidney Poitier was just someone who many actors look to. And I think about my mom and how much she loved everything that he was in. I remember growing up watching reruns of certain things and just being exposed to his movies and his work. And then The Measure of a Man. We really have a lot to celebrate about him. And I'm really love the fact that he was a girl's dad. So all of his daughters are so proud of the legacy that they carry. I believe one of them wrote a tribute that has been circulating within the last, say, 24 hours or so. But what a wonderful legacy to leave, at the stage in life where he was very engaged all the way until the end. I mean, not everyone has that blessing to be in their right mind as they age and witness decades of life. So definitely someone I admire. And as a recent thespian in the theater, I appreciate what he contributed to the art.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to a NPR interview of him, from some years back, on WNYC. I'm an avid listener to I confess to be an avid listener of WNYC, and an affiliate of the NPR National Public Radio franchise. And it was amazing listening to this interview because he was actually talking about when he first came to the United States and how he was a delivery man and so forth, and I think he worked in the kitchen or something like that. And also he had he wasn't the best reader at first. And as an actor, you have to read these scripts, you have to memorize them, and then you have to act them out. And so he was talking about how in his first audition he kind of tried to fake it till he could make it and got kicked out of there because he was trying to read these lines and didn't have it together in terms of his reading skills, and got grabbed by the collar and thrown out. And then he continued to persist, and he talked about the level of racism that he endured, because I believe he was living in Florida, which is the South. Let's not get it twisted for these people who love running down to Miami and acting like it's a second New York. No, it is the South. Many parts of Florida are the deep South. And so he talked about the level of racism he endured, although during the time period he's talking, you got people catching hell up here in New York City at that time. But anyway, he talked about how he was delivering an item to a home, and the white woman who answered the door said, "Oh, you got to take that to the back." And so he didn't understand that. He came from Nassau, I believe, which is part of, I believe, the Bahamas at that. And so he's kind of used to different racial dynamics in terms of the white Brits who live there and the majority black population. And so now he's here in America in the deep South dealing with, white people here. And apparently what he did, instead of taking the package to the back, he just dropped the package there at the front of the home and left, thinking he had completed his task. Lo and behold, when he got home, he found out, I believe, from his sister that the clan had come, the local clansmen had come to visit the home. And his sister was like, "What did you do? What did you do?" And he was like, "What do you mean? What did I do? I didn't do anything." And, and it spoke to the slightest things that could put a black life in danger in the South during that time period. And his perseverance and his, I always looked at Sidney Poitier as a race man, a black man's man, a guy that you looked at and you could be proud of, and the way he stood, the way he walked, the way he talked, the way he moved. I mean, huge loss, huge loss. I love those pictures that they've been circulating with him and Harry Belafonte. I mean, it's just beautiful. I mean, we lost a real giant. Once again, may you rest in peace, brother. May you rest in peace. Sidney Poitier.
Yes, yes, another class act, and we had a couple of losses because we lost another. This is where the legal meets the cultural. So we take a moment, of course, to say rest in power to all that have recently departed. When we find out, and James Ntume is another person
Oh
who
yeah.
recently passed away. And Kevin, yet we were getting to him. We didn't forget him. It's just so much happening at the same time, but we definitely want to pay our respects to the classic, right? This is just part of culturally. You had to be touched by his music in some way.
Oh yeah, definitely. He used to definitely bring the funk. That's for sure. No doubt.
So that, and he was pretty young. 75 is young.
Yeah, yeah.
It's all relative. And I'm
Yeah.
like, woof, we're losing a lot of the greats. So we definitely want to pay tribute to him as well. And I believe Raymond was saying that Mr. Poitier was a giant. Yes, he was. He was. We stand on strong shoulders, and this is our point in the show where we always just pause to be grateful to have experienced the brilliance of our ancestors when they transition. And then we get into, some of the other news that legally understanding what we see play out can be very interesting. And once again, when you talk about a man's man and standing up and making you proud when you see him do certain things, we are still under attack when we're being vetted for some of the higher offices in the
If I if
country.
but before you go to that story, Dr. Grant,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
just want to pay tribute and offer condolences
Oh,
to
yes.
these families in the Bronx that endured this terrible fire. I believe in the Fordham Heights section of the Bronx. I believe it's 19 deaths. Many of them children, I believe 8 or
Yes.
9. Oh my gosh! When I first heard this story, my heart just skipped a beat. I just couldn't believe it, because it takes me back to the Happy Land fire and how that impacted the Garifuna community, in the Bronx, and how many people died during that. And in some ways, people are looking and saying, how could this happen? You're hearing about these portable heaters. You hearing about these
Mhm.
doors that don't automatically close. You hearing about people needlessly dying, trying to run through smoke-filled
Yes.
stairways and hallways, and how this spread throughout the building. I mean, it's just absolutely tragic. And so, I just want to offer my condolences and my sympathies to these families. I believe most of these folks were from the Gambian community of West Africa, recent immigrants. Awful, absolutely awful.
Yes, and thank you. As I had that queued up, it's the trauma of it you really have no words, and they're still searching to find certain members of these families. There are a lot of relief efforts being made, and I'm researching some of what New York City Council members are doing. Our majority whip is here in Queens, and she is working on just some of the direct access. We know that the city has a fund, and there's some groups on the ground in the Bronx that are doing their best to help. But our prayers definitely go out to them, because fire moves so quickly, and to think that some of them just didn't know to stay locked in. And like you said, it's traveling through is what.
No, no.
Wow.
Listen. At the end of the day, this is an exemplification of the importance of regulations and also enforcement. I can tell you just from a personal story. Many years ago, I had a friend of mine who was living in a building that was undergoing a significant amount of, say, renovation, and really in that instance, it was renovation basically designed to try to up the rent by the owner and extract more wealth out of the property. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is in some of these cases, these owners are doing this for strictly their very narrow benefit and to the detriment of the residents, or either that, or you have owners that are trying to save a few chips and trying to maintain a dangerous profit motive. And in that instance, the owner had basically removed fire escapes without getting the proper permits, and so it caused the buildings department, I believe, triggered by the fire department, to have to order all of the residents to leave the building with absolutely no plan on where they would live. So I ended up having to come onto the scene after I got his call, and not that I was like a landlord tenant lawyer, a building lawyer. I just was, I just felt like I needed to go over there, and because the owner had the residents signing these like disclaimer agreements in order for them to get a check from the owner to be able to get alternative housing at either hotels or Airbnbs or the like. And it was a disaster. And I had to come in there and say, no, this guy has to give you that check regardless, because he's the one that's causing you to be homeless right now. Don't sign anything. Don't let this guy off of the hook. And so, I'm on the scene talking to these tenants, and I remember this old man. He had to be like, I don't know, in his 70s or 80s, very confused as to what was going on, waiting for his adult daughter to come and orient him as to what was going to happen next. And I've seen, and this was in the Bronx, so I've seen what happens when regulatory agencies don't enforce regulations and don't do it. And I'm not saying that that's what happened here, because the investigation is still ongoing, but there are a lot of signs that, because they're talking about the particular door not automatically closing for this apartment, but what about the doors in the hallway and the stairways and all that? How did this spread so quickly? It's just, I think over the course of the next couple of months, we're going to see the story of a lot of regulatory breakdowns. I just get that notion that that's what's going to happen here, but none of that is going to bring these people
Families back.
But
No.
I hope some increased level of enforcement and vigilance saves others in the future. This should not be happening in 2022. It should not.
No. Should not. And in addition to that, you have the challenge, as you mentioned, about a lot of the immigrants that are here from Gambia. There's a language barrier. So, and some people are concerned about ICE. We talk about immigration on this show as well, and you and Mr. Russell and the work that you do. So we have multiple layers. It's the trauma and the loss, and it's the barrier to understanding, people not feeling comfortable calling or getting the help that they deserve and that they are eligible for. So whatever we can do in addition to the financial piece, there's a lot of recovery that'll be required in this particular area. So
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the first press conference that I saw on this had Senator Schumer there, and what was explained was that Senator Schumer was there in particular to try to provide some level of support with respect to those who will have to possibly travel to Gambia, and making sure that they will be allowed to return, and using the congressional weight and power of his office to make sure that that occurs, because I know there may be some of these people who, without that assistance, will be concerned about being able to leave and then be able to return. So I hope that that is taking place. Thank God that, for those folks, that we have a Biden administration, and hopefully that Biden administration and that Department of State and that, and that INS is working closely with the congressional representative of that community and Senator Schumer to make sure that those folks are able to go properly bury these folks. And the other twist to this is what I'm hearing too is this is also a very heavily Muslim community. And for those who understand Islam requires a rather quick burial, if you will, as soon as possible, is my understanding. I myself am not Muslim, but my understanding from those that I know in the Muslim community is that burials have to take place fairly quickly. And so that was a particular concern here as well. Godspeed to those folks, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. And whatever resources you can provide or assistance, definitely look at the council. City council is banding together to help. There are other organizations on the ground that are helping. So everything counts when you're in crisis, because it could happen anywhere. This shouldn't have happened, and that's a whole nother conversation about how their lives could have been spared. But it's times like this when we can come together as a community and help those who are going through crisis.
Yes.
So now on to other news, and that
Mm-hmm.
is a very interesting story. What have we here? Uh, Republican GOP Marsha Blackburn hammers Black judicial nominee over speeding tickets, referring to it as a rap sheet from 10 years ago.
Yes.
What say you,
I mean,
Attorney Russell? I
I
mean,
mean,
Richardo, I can hear Russell in my head saying a word now about it.
listen, when people talk about rap sheet, of course they're not talking about music. Usually, rap sheet refers to a criminal record, and very rarely is a speeding ticket does a speeding ticket rise to a criminal offense, and then even then, most of the time, well, no, just inordinately, all of the time, it's a misdemeanor when you, I guess, exceed certain speeds. I mean, I would imagine, I didn't get an opportunity to review this judicial nominee's traffic record, which is the way it should have been quoted. But the reality of it is, this is really actually completely irrelevant. I mean, except to the most, I guess, square of individuals, I would have to say. I mean, if you're asking for that level of obedience to the law, or then I think you are going to exclude a lot of folks, because if I can't even get a traffic ticket, in order to become nominated and confirmed to the bench, then who can. I got a feeling that if we examine the traffic records of the current members of the judiciary, and as a barometer as to whether or not they are actually qualified to be on the bench, I think you're gonna end up rendering the justice system of most of its members of the judiciary. I mean,
which
this is
is
absolutely
great.
ridiculous, and in fact, I would say it is racist. I
Yeah.
can't call it anything but that.
It is what it is.
I believe that Marsha Blackburn represents the infamous state of Mississippi, and not. I don't say that to say, I know residents of Mississippi. I love people in Mississippi, but it has a history, and unfortunately, it has this representative, which they probably should think twice about reelecting. Quite frankly, after seeing something like this, I saw another clip of her badgering, I believe, the same nominee, Andre Mathis. He, just for the edification of the audience, this is an African American gentleman who has been nominated to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, I think on a previous show, I informed our audience as that the Court of Appeals on the federal level is based on different circuits that are geographically spread around the country, and the Sixth Circuit covers the states of Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and Tennessee, and it sits actually in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so, he's been nominated to serve on that bench. And so, the members of the Judiciary Committee of the Senate, the Senate does appointments, they confirm. And so they get to ask these nominees questions to, as to their qualifications or fitness. And, she was, the one I saw, she was grilling this gentleman over his experience litigating in the Sixth Circuit and his name being on certain briefs, and his, I guess, and even with that, it's the intention here is to mislead the audience, to be quite frank. And anytime that you have, or most of the time when you have appellate work, you have a number of attorneys involved in the litigation and taking on different tasks when it comes to these appeals. And so she was trying to talk about, oh, well, there was this other attorney involved, and it's clear your clients didn't have faith in you because they hired this other attorney to do this part of the appeal. And it was like, come on, I'm sure if you examine most of the appeals on that circuit, you're going to find that there are a team of attorneys involved in each one of those appeals. So for you to go and say that somehow indicates a level of a lack of faith by the actual client is definitely misleading. So this is this is going to be interesting, because one of the things, unfortunately, that the last president was very, very effective at is the appointment of judges.
17.
Yeah, and so it's going to be very important that the Democrats in the Senate be very focused on getting these nominees, certified, appointed, sworn in, and put in place, because that's going to affect litigation on the federal level for years and years to come. So, and do not allow, this stuff to distract. These are distractions, clear distractions. So I'm glad that, we're profiling this story and letting folks know this is what's going on behind the scenes. So, pay attention to it, and support the Dems in their, effort at trying to restore the balance on the federal judiciary, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, we spent time on the show talking about what was happening in plain sight that no one was paying attention to when these appointments were being made. And one of the Democrats was making that case, as you listen to the recording, making the case of how it happened. And they didn't receive the paper or the clearance that they were supposed to. And the Republicans went right on ahead and moved forward with confirming. It's up to 17, I believe, is the correct number. So we need to pay attention to this, because these are the individuals who are going to sit in these chambers and make decisions that affect our communities, potential friends of friends, family, whoever. This is it, getting these appointments. And these are parts of the chess game that a lot of us, when we talk about where the legal meets the cultural, that we miss because we don't even understand how important that is. And it happened and nobody knew until certain people started bringing out and talking through what was happening. So it's
Yeah,
just
and a lot of this is designed to, you know, hold up the process, to paralyze it, to intimidate these nominees. I mean, at one point she was making a big deal out of the fact, apparently, that she didn't get to have a meeting with this nominee, although the nominee was talking about, well, I met with your counsel. I mean, and you know, it was never stated to me that there was a desire by you to meet with me. And of course, she was talking over him. And are you saying, I know for a fact that, you know, you didn't meet with me or didn't want to meet with, you know? And it was like, you know, are you serious? I mean, really? All meant, you know, all distractions meant to distract and you know, blur the focus here. So, you know, once again, I hope the Dems do not get distracted here and move forward with these appointments. I mean, listen, to be honest with you, I'm a little concerned about the coming elections, the midterm elections that are, you know, coming up, and you know what's going to happen in the House. I just hope that we seize the time, you know, and when I say we, I mean the progressives, because you got some Democrats who aren't progressive, quite obviously. I hope the progressive Dems and, you know, and even the moderates, you know, they stay focused, work together, stay on task, and do what needs to be done to ensure, you know, the people's rights, that those who are entrusted with reviewing these cases that will no doubtly come up in the future are people that are going to, you know, give fair and due a review to, you know, and actually, you know, provide justice here.
absolutely. And we're going to definitely talk more as we lead into these midterms. We need to pay attention and we need to encourage everyone to stay engaged in the process. Change doesn't happen just sitting on the sidelines complaining and pontificating about it. You have to do something. And we
And and and
still. Mhm.
and listen, and people, you know, they got to understand that if you call yourself, you know, if you say, listen, I'm an activist, there's nothing wrong with you helping out folks that are going through it in other states, and you don't have to actually leave the state. You know,
Mhm.
you can phone bank right from where you are. You can participate, and if you want to go down there, you can go down there. I remember years ago me going down and leafleting in conservative parts of Pennsylvania, helping those folks out, you know, get the word out. You know, you don't have to stay here. You don't have to just focus on what's happening here in New York City, because a lot of times what ends up happening is folks feel like, you know, we're okay here in New York City. We don't have to worry about, quote unquote, certain things happening here, but they're happening in other states and they will come back and affect you, you know. And so, you
Absolutely.
know, there's nothing wrong with you saying, you know what, I'm going to go help out my brothers and sisters in Georgia. I'm going to go
Mhm.
help out my brothers and sisters in neighboring Pennsylvania, certain conservative parts of Jersey, even, you know what I mean? You know, there's nothing wrong with that, you know, going down there to Virginia and so forth, you know, be safe, of course, right? You know, you gotta, you gotta be safe. Don't do
And
nothing
yeah,
reckless, you know?
phone banking is safe, so that's a good thing.
Well, you
But
know,
yes, to
sometimes you
your
need some on the ground, you know, work, but you know, I'm just saying, you know, be safe, you know, protect yourself, but at the same time, you
exactly.
know, be active. Yeah.
And that's the bottom line. This is speaking legally where the legal meets the cultural. We can't stress enough how important it is to be involved and, like you said, on the ground or whether you're phone banking, there's always a way to contribute your time and your participation in getting the right people elected. So that segues into our next story, which there's been a lot with this historic election of the first African American district attorney in Manhattan. Now there's a memo that has gone out, and there's some challenges in the media.
Yeah. District Attorney Bragg has been getting quite a lot of criticism from various quarters of law enforcement regarding this memo right here. Now, this memo right here kind of, basically is like a layout, and it's, well, first of all, it says at the very top, if you read, to all staff, not to the general public, not to the citizens of New York County, Manhattan, or the city of New York, or this was apparently an internal memo that was put out by his office to all of his staff, the various assistant district attorneys throughout the office, as to what, he wanted to do to achieve fairness and safety in line with his progressive vision for the office upon being elected. And right at the front, he talks about, growing up in Harlem and some of the stuff that he's experienced. So most of the stuff in here is of no controversy here. What is controversial is, I believe, on page 6 or 5, there's, he starts getting on a granular level into how certain incidents are supposed to be handled in terms of the actual charges. And I believe it's item 6. It talks about penal law 160.15, which is actually robbery in the first degree. And he goes in there to talk about certain sections, and if this type of incident occurs in a quote unquote commercial setting, say a store, right, that it should be charged as a misdemeanor if the force or threat of force consists of displaying a dangerous item, a dangerous instrument, or similar behavior, but does not create a genuine risk of physical harm. So what is he talking about here? What he's talking about, I would imagine, is possibly an incident where someone goes into a store, grabs an item, uses force, maybe pushes the security guard or a person who works there and runs out with the item, right? Or says, or grabs something and says, "Listen, I'm gonna, hit you with this if you don't let me just leave the store with this box of beer or of cosmetics or whatever." There's been, as most of you, most of us that live here in the city are well aware, especially during this pandemic and so forth, there's been, kind of a rise in petty crime. And I myself witnessed an incident at a Rite Aid on 125th, or rather even another store here in Harlem, where the person, it was a male, he grabs, I forgot what he grabbed some merchandise, and when the security guard tried to stop him, he pushed him and left. That was a use of force. Now, a use of force can put you into a felony category in terms of charges, okay? And I think what DA Bragg here is trying to avoid is an incident where there wasn't a genuine risk of physical harm to the person, but the incident itself would technically qualify for a felony. The problem here is that, first of all, this got out to the public sphere. People are basically looking at this and saying, wait a minute, is he saying that, you're going to allow, there's already a level of paranoia as to the rising crime and people getting away with, with impunity, with, certain levels of crime. I live in Harlem. I live in the community. I see it. There's a store near me that has closed, no doubt, because of the level of shoplifting that took place. I went in there some months ago before it closed, and at one point there was no merchandise on the shelves. And I actually went in there and witnessed a gentleman who seemed to be mentally disturbed, just grabbing items, throwing them into a bag, and cursing and yelling and walking out with the items. I even witnessed an incident in that same store where one of the younger male African American staff there grabbing a shoplifter and saying, "Hey, listen, you're not leaving with that," and getting into a verbal match and almost a fisticuffs, and the amount of pressure there, and I saw the police officers at the Shake Shack,
Mm.
not really, right outside, not really doing much, or when I pointed out to one of them that there had been an incident down the block, said to me, "Well, hey, listen, they've legalized shoplifting in California. They're probably going to do it here soon." Like, kind of like a very cavalier attitude. I've had to tap on police car windows to say, "Hey, look, listen, there's something going on. And I don't feel like a snitch on that. What it is that we live in the community, and we want the laws in our community to be enforced. At the same time, though, we don't want over incarceration. We don't want what happened in the 80s where we got legions of black men upstate, rotting up there for, even after, for stuff that they should be home with their families. I mean, and this over charging in terms of felonies. So I think what to DA Bragg's benefit here is that maybe this may not have been worded the best way. Maybe this could have been worded differently. Maybe there could have been better definition. Maybe there could have been maybe some caveats as to, listen, if you encounter a situation where there's an issue here in terms of whether this person should not be charged with a felony, check in with your ECAB supervisor. In one of the other parts of this memo, you have that proviso at the end of a directive regarding a certain charging decision, so that it's clear to the public that, look, listen, this isn't a blanket policy. We're going to look at each and every instance. In terms of the criticism, unfortunately, they've pitted our first black female police commissioner, Sewell, against our first black DA of New York County. She's one of the ones who was the first to come out and say that, because it's not only this, actually, there's also another part of this memo. I'd have to look and see where it's at, that talks about resisting arrest and how those incidents should be charged. Now, for those of you in the know, a lot of times, unfortunately, police officers will seek to cover their excessive use of force by charging individuals with obstructing or resisting arrest when they really weren't resisting arrest. Okay, and I think that's what DA Bragg is trying to get at. But unfortunately, if you don't word things a certain way, if you don't put things out into the public sphere a certain way, certain people will take those pronouncements and twist them. There will be, they will change the narrative. They will, make it look as something that it's not. And so unfortunately now DA Bragg is having to explain what he meant in this memo, actually explain these policies, their underpinnings, and the reasons why. And I hope that doesn't derail from what he's actually trying to do here. I really hope it doesn't. But of course, with respect to Sewell, we're on the resisting arrest issue. It's pitting her against DA Bragg. My understanding is that they were able to have a meeting and they reached an understanding, and that DA Bragg was able to clarify his position and bring her some comfort that, attacks on officers will not be tolerated by his office, and that any individual attacking an officer will be charged as they are supposed to under the law. So her police officers, quote unquote, aren't in danger in the county of Manhattan. It's also triggered a look at some of the other DAs throughout New York City, because as folks need to understand, each borough, which is considered a county, has its own DA. Bronx has its DA. Queens has its DA. Brooklyn has its DA. Gonzalez in the Bronx is Darcel Clark. In Staten Island, it's McMahon. So, of course, McMahon is probably the most conservative out of that group. Is saying, oh, what DA Bragg is doing is wrong, etc. But we see what goes on in Staten Island and Eric Garner. I'm sure he's not going to talk about that and his murder. But anyway, that's a whole nother story for another day.
I was like, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. So yeah, and then you got the president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association, coming down on DA Bragg and causing a hyperbole. People are apparently saying, oh, we should consider a recall, even though there's no such thing under, New York state law. But, people are trying to throw that into the atmosphere. So, once again, I implore the audience not to get caught up in the news articles, not to get caught up in the spin. Actually read this memo. It was an internal memo, but it's now online. You saw we displayed it online. Read it. It's not that long. It's about we're talking about maybe 10 pages, 3 of which are like kind of a memo, and then the rest are kind of like policy directives. Not that long. Read it. Read it for yourself. Judge for yourself whether or not DA Bragg is giving away the store, whether or not he's making you unsafe. And
that requires it requires reading to understand what's going on, because we know anything can have a spin in the news.
Now, and then keep in mind this was written for lawyers, and he made that clear. You can't just read this thing and not have to go to the penal law and the criminal penal law. You're gonna have to do some referencing in terms of, oh wait, what's 160.15? What does that say? Okay, now the New York Post, they came out with some article recently where they were trying to say, oh, what are you trying to say, DA Bragg? And they kind of tried to dissect it. Listen, don't go by that. Read it for yourself. Read it for yourself. See if what it's in here you agree with. If you don't like, if you had a problem with over incarceration, if you got a problem with the criminal justice system, if you feel like there's a lot of overcharging that took place, previously, if you feel like too many women of color have too many felonies on their record, read this before you start judging. Okay, the tragedy here, is that people are, because one of the things is, of course, is when I started looking at this controversy, it intersects right with an incident that recently occurred in Harlem, where this poor, beautiful young teenage woman was recently shot to death by a man who came into a Burger King and shot her over $100. Even after he got the 100, he pulls out the gun. She gives him the money. He still shoots her. So people, you start reading the spin. You look at this incident, and listen. I have no doubt that if they find this individual, DA Bragg will charge him to the limits of the law here. I have no doubt about that, because I know Al, and I know that he's not going to be like, oh, well, my memo, this has nothing to do with that, okay? This has nothing to do with that. Anybody who says otherwise is not being honest, okay?
Yeah.
Not being truthful, okay? Indeed. But unfortunately, what happens is you have incidents, you have spin, and then you have hyperbole and misunderstanding, and you then have later on harm, and that's what we don't want to happen here. No. Once again, I would say to folks, before you go judging and then coming to conclusions, read it for yourself. Yes, say to yourself, okay, listen, I'm going to read this thing. I'm going to look and see if what they're saying is true before I go running around and
repeating
saying, it. Repeating it and saying, oh, he's making us unsafe. Listen, I'm I'm very sensitive about what's going on in my community
Mhm.
right now. No question. Like I said, I don't live in the suburbs. I live in the neighborhood, and I'm concerned. But at the same time,
Mhm.
I'm also making sure that I don't jump to conclusions either. And also at the same time, this whole, when it comes to crime, it's not just the DA, it's not just the police. There's a lot of other players in this thing. There's the police on the ground. There's the district attorney's office, the ADAs who work for the district attorney. Then you got the judges.
Mhm.
Then, and then if a person ends up on probation or in a alternative to incarceration program, you have,
Mhm.
Department of Probation, and you have, all of these are players in this system. And when something breaks down or something happens, people come up with very swift conclusions, and I would implore folks to examine the incident, examine the issue before they come to conclusions. So,
Right.
that's what's happening here, I believe.
Yeah, and we'll see how all of this plays out because he's also talking about some of the disparity, right? So the memo is addressing disparities in how law enforcement slash how what they prosecute, not prosecute. So we don't want this to be a distraction on broader issues that he is being a trailblazer with and reimagining what the criminal justice system could really look like in one of the largest cities in the country. So I'm sure we're going to talk more about this as we move forward. And really, my prayer is that it doesn't, like you said, people read it and understand what this is for what it is and not let some of the good that he is trying to lift up and to have at the conversation or with his assistant district attorneys, because this was internal, it was leaked, and you have to believe that was deliberate to just start confusion off at the beginning of a term. So
Yeah,
stay tuned.
absolutely. Yeah, and I what I would say too is that don't get caught up in the color here, okay? Just because you know he's black and the police commissioner is black shouldn't be like, oh, well, if she's saying it, then him. No, look at the facts. Look at what's going on, regardless of who's leveling the criticism. Don't get caught up in the hyperbole. Also, I really, the 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 predominant voices in this current debate on this issue, um, from the progressive left communities, for me, seem to be lacking. I want to hear. Maybe, in all fairness, maybe the media isn't giving them their voice, but I think it's important that the groups and the individuals who supported DA Bragg also get to be heard and support him in terms of what he's trying to do. You know what I mean? Because it's important that folks hear from them as well, because I believe that what it is he's being faithful to his constituency, those who supported him in this race. He's speaking to what they asked him to do as the
Right.
DA, and so
Exactly.
he's trying to carry that out faithfully. And so those groups, those individuals, those voices also need to get out there and be heard as to, hey, listen, you know, give the brother some space, let him explain his position. This is what he obviously is or seems to be trying to do. Give him
Right. Give
time.
him an opportunity.
Yeah, give him opportunity. Okay,
Give him
don't
an
get
opportunity.
yeah, don't get caught up. That's my man, and that's who and I believe this is what he's trying to do, or this is what he meant, which is what happens when somebody, what they're trying to do. Listen, this gentleman used to be a prosecutor himself. He worked for the New York Attorney General. He's eminently qualified. Okay, he has the bona fides, as they say. You know what I mean? So so
Well,
so
well,
so so folks need to give that brother some space,
and
and
give him an
hear him out.
opportunity.
Yeah,
Give him an opportunity to defend his positions and explain, which he really shouldn't be caught up. That was internal. It was an internal memo. But this is the world that we're living in. Everything is public consumption at this point. If it's out there in the world, somebody's going to find it somewhere and use it for leverage, but to be continued. And we hope that as the tide is changing, not just in New York City, but all over the country with new elected officials in different positions. I want to definitely shout out Adrian Adams, who is now the historic speaker for city council. So I definitely am excited to just see, she's a personal friend, but to see the historic nature by which she has taken this role and is just very serious about the work of New York City Council. And, congratulations again to all of the 31 women in government. I know we had mentioned that before, but I just had to say it again as we're talking about giving folks a chance. There's a lot of new leadership, a lot of new ideas that are coming to the table. And basically, when women lead, the world is just better. So I had to put that little spin in there. But thank you for tuning in to another episode of Speaking Legally. Mr. Russell sends his regards to everyone. And Senor Picharo, any closing words before we vamonos?
No, I just want to say I'm also happy with the increase in female representation in the New York City Council. I believe it's going to have a lot of very beneficial results for the community, for New York City as a whole, and it brings a new perspective on a number of issues. So I'm also happy. I believe the number went from 11 to 31, I believe, which is
31. That's
just
right.
absolutely amazing. And so
Amazing.
much props there, and I hope it goes well. And listen, folks, just please stay safe. This Omicron is ravaging the community. I'm hearing about a lot of people being ill, falling ill, being hospitalized. Not to mention some of the deaths we've been experiencing. I've personally been touched, and for those others who've been touched by this invisible force, not visible to the eye. I would say, Godspeed, and please stay safe. And my prayers go out to you, and I hope you keep your prayers present for my own family. And just take care, folks.
Absolutely. I saw the last comment from Miss Suku, I believe it is. What if they're a corrupt woman in the game? Well, nothing is a perfect science. We hope that there's no corruption.
Yeah, hey,
And,
they say every sister ain't a sister. That's what it is.
Look,
I mean,
we're Hope Springs Eternal. We don't have Mr. Russell here to balance us out, but I'm on the Hope Springs Eternal. And if something is corrupt or not going well, then, hey, that needs to be addressed. So
listen, there was a level of corruption going on even before these sisters came into office. So, it's going to be, and like I mentioned earlier, you can't just go by color. You can't go by gender.
Right.
If you voted based on affinity, because, you voted, say, for an African-American woman because you're African-American, or you voted for a Caribbean-American woman because you're Caribbean-American, then that doesn't stop you from holding their feet to the fire. And if they're not doing the right thing and they're breaking the law, otherwise not living up to the pronouncements they made during the campaign, then you are entitled to, hold their feet to the fire and say, hey, listen, you're not doing what you promised to do, or you're doing something wrong, and you need to you need to either resign, or be forced from office. That's what you do. That's what democracy is about. That's what being an advocate is about. That's about you exercising your rights, in terms of seeking redress from the government. First, plain old First Amendment. And there's no reason why you need to stay silent. I remember during the Obama administration, you had some folks criticizing the president, saying, listen, I don't care if he's a brother. I don't like what he's doing. And I said, listen, you're entitled. And I've gotten into some debates as to why I think he's the greatest president in history. And people would say, what are you talking about, Ed? This and this happened. I said, okay, let's go. Let's go.
There's
You,
always,
yeah,
always discourse,
yeah. You pull out your facts, and I'll pull out mine, and
and we'll
hopefully,
go back and
and
forth.
when we'll meet in the middle and still be friends, and I still
Yeah.
love you. You know what I mean?
Awesome.
No
And
problem.
that's really what we can hope for, that there's a level of respect. That if you
Exactly.
don't agree, if you can find the facts, but you got to fact check things, especially in
Oh,
this world
oh yeah.
of
Don't be sitting
interesting.
here trying to pull stuff out of your, you know what?
Mhm. Exactly.
They
But
just coming up with stuff.
I want to shout out Jason. Thanks for tuning in. Uje Suko, I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you for tuning in. Kevin, thank you. Reverend Miller, Raymond, Kevin Thornburn, Dana. We appreciate all of you that have tuned in today, and we look forward to connecting again. Next week, we have Martin Luther King Jr. Day coming up. A day on, not a day off. It's a day of service. So I hope that you're going to find something to do, even though a lot of things are going virtual because of the Omicron surge. But let's honor the man and the legend as that approaches on Monday. So take care, everyone, and be safe, as Ed said. All right, Senor Pichado. Adios,
Take
amigo.
care. Adios.